Hello, hello, hello. Cynthia Allen, Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. We're wrapping up the Neurological Challenges track, and I'll introduce our final speaker of this track in a moment. But first, of course, we just got those little housekeeping details to talk about, which include that there is a chat area. You're probably pretty familiar with it by now, but if you're new here today, go take a look. Find it, introduce yourself. Over there you'll find Arlene Klein, our summit coordinator and behind the scenes guru, and she will be happy to help you out if you've got some technical questions, and she'll be dropping some links and things like that into the area for you. But otherwise, go ahead and have a discussion with each other, because right after this is the panel discussion with Deborah Bose and Rob Black on the neurological challenges track. And we will be using some of the chat discussion from all three talks to spark our conversation. And that will be helpful to us. So I think that's the main things I need to say. So let me go ahead and start getting ready here to introduce Marg Bartosek. I said it wrong.
Bartosek.
I've been practicing that all week, Marg. I mean, I have been practicing it since you told me. And can you believe at that moment I've been saying it right all along. And then it was I just reverted back to what I've been saying in my head now for years, because I never asked you before how you said your last name. So Marg has a master's degree in public administration and a certificate in gerontology. She worked in community-based aging services for 15 years prior to becoming a Feldenkrais practitioner. She's been a Feldenkrais practitioner certified for 25 years, and she specializes in helping people to move well into middle and older age. She has a particular interest in posture and balance and fall prevention, and that led her to become a certified Bones for Life teacher. So that's in Ruth Yolande's movement intelligence work. And she also has been working with the Walk for Life work out of movement intelligence as well. 4 years ago, Marg created a class just for people with Parkinson's disease. And she's been teaching us weekly, does it mean twice a week? Twice a week, mindful movement with Parkinson's class that incorporates Feldenkrais work along with other PD-specific exercises. And we'll get her to talk a little bit more about her classes and her approach, because, hey, that's the topic today, so why not? But first, let me just say welcome, Marg. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm pleased to be here, Cynthia.
Yeah, it's fun to have you. And, you know, your story about how you really came to Feldenkrais, I think, is so powerful. I'd like to ask you to start with it.
Okay. Well, in 1986, I came down with an autoimmune illness called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And in my case, it was a result of food poisoning. But the eventual outcome, or what happens, is that a person basically is paralyzed and has to learn all over again to move. So I was off work and in intensive care, a number of months in the hospital and in a rehab facility. And the usual kinds of ways that people recover through physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, weren't quite giving me everything back that I wanted. And a couple of different friends had mentioned the Feldenkrais method to me. I'd never heard of it before. And I thought, why not? What have I got to lose? And began reading more and then working with Elizabeth Berenger, one of the other speakers on the summit. And that was my introduction to the Feldenkrais method. And I did learn to walk and move and recover those movements that were not coming back quite so easily. And because I worked in the field of aging, I thought, wow, this is perfect for us as we get older. And that was ultimately what drew me into taking a training and teaching the method.
Great. And I would think that having had that experience would make you such a good teacher for people challenged by something like Parkinson's disease, because you have a sense of how difficult it can be when you can't get your body to do what you think it should do.
Yes, I hope so. I think it's important with Parkinson's, probably with many things, to recognize that it's way more than simply a movement kind of disease, that there are cognitive, there are emotional issues as well. And so I hope my experience makes me perhaps a little bit more understanding and compassionate. Yes.
Good. Well, can you get us started helping us just maybe to understand a little bit about Parkinson's? I think you've got a few little slides to show us.
Yes. Right. So, first of all, Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurodegenerative disease and is the second most common one after Alzheimer's disease. And as I mentioned a moment ago, a lot of people think of Parkinson's as primarily a movement limitation, but it does have effects on literally so many systems in our body and our mind as well. It is characterized by a decrease of the neurotransmitter dopamine in the brain. Lots of people have it. In the US, over 1 million people, and that number is expected to double in the next 20 years. So every year, about 60,000 new diagnoses are made. Now, it's important to recognize that when a person gets the diagnosis of Parkinson's, they probably had the disease for 4 or 5 years before that and have already lost between 40 and 60% of the dopamine receptors in their brain. Primarily, it is a disease of older adults, and of the group in our country, the population over the age of 60, 1% is living with Parkinson's disease, and that goes up to 4% over the age of 65. Although usually the diagnosis is made between age 55 and 65. Interestingly, men outnumber women by a factor of 3 to 2. Now, there's a statement that sometimes you hear in the Parkinson's community: if you know one person with Parkinson's disease, well, you know one person with Parkinson's disease. And that's because each individual person has their own unique set of challenges and symptoms. So I mentioned dopamine, and you can see here in this image that on the healthy patient, the brain where there's plenty of dopamine, compared with the brain of a Parkinson's person, where in that synapse between the connecting and communicating neurons, much less dopamine. And that's going to have an effect on movement. It means that the movement the person naturally is engaged in is probably not going to be as quick. It may not be as big. In addition, dopamine plays a very important role in motivation, especially in the area of automatic kinds of movements, like walking. And that's one place probably where Parkinson's shows up very, very clearly. A shortened step, less of an arm swing. So these unconscious movements, smiling when you are excited or pleased to see someone, these automatic things that most of us don't even have to think about, the decrease in dopamine means those kinds of things don't happen for a person with Parkinson's. In addition, or don't happen as easily. In addition, the dopamine helps to strengthen those movement circuits, those connections in the brain that allow us to learn and change. And we'll talk more about neuroplasticity later on. So less dopamine means less motivation to move, slower, smaller movements, and less enjoyment of moving. I think it's important to recognize that folks with Parkinson's may want to move. They understand the importance of movement and exercise, but they may need a little additional encouragement and support simply because they don't have some of the the motivation that most of us take for granted. So to wrap up, the main motor challenges that are experienced with this disease: tremor, trembling. This is one that probably people kind of think of as going with Parkinson's, but in fact, not everyone with the disease experiences a tremor, especially right at first. In my experience, stiffness in the limbs, in the trunk, a little bit of less coordination. This is much more common, especially as the disease progresses. Moving a little bit slower, that maybe a shuffling step, a smaller step, is quite frequent. This issue of freezing, of being like glued to the ground. The person has a difficult time picking up their foot and moving. And certainly there are things that can be learned to help with that, but it can be a big challenge. And finally, problems with posture, balance, and coordination mean that people with Parkinson's are at particular risk of falling and all of the negative consequences that can occur from that. So
that's very helpful, Marg. There's actually something that I learned in that I did not realize is how much effect dopamine would have on the unconscious movements. And it's interesting that you connected that to motivation, because I was very aware that the motivation is low, can be very low to get up, move, and do, and that there needs to be a lot of support in order to help the person not just end up sort of withdrawing into their own situation, I guess. Of course, not for everybody, like you said. But I had not really ever connected that to unconscious movements like smiling, dopamine and motivation and smiling, or fascinating that it actually affects the unconscious processes more.
Well, Parkinson's, I think, often attack or affects those unconscious processes. And this idea actually, I really became aware of through Norman Doidge's work. I'll pick his book up here for a moment, The Brain's Way of Healing. And that because, and I think this is a relatively new understanding of one of the roles of dopamine, that it's almost as if our brain is kind of deciding, or our system somehow is deciding, is it worth it to me to move? Am I going to get enough reward to move? And for most of us, this is for all of us, it's happening unconsciously, and our dopamine is kind of helping that to occur. But if you have less dopamine, that can affect these kinds of unconscious processes. And I want to talk a little bit more about the whole conscious, unconscious differences that we're needing to explore here.
Yeah, well, go ahead and go into that a little bit.
Okay. Well, as we've kind of inferred already, or talked in already, some of the usual ways that people have of moving are less available to them if they have Parkinson's disease. Now, to use kind of the map analogy that we're using here in the summit, it's like the usual path you take to get from one place to another is blocked off, maybe with construction or extra traffic. And so you need another route. And that, I think, is where the Feldenkrais method can be helpful to people with Parkinson's, because we teach new movement patterns that can substitute for some of the movements that may not be working quite so easily. And you might think about Google Maps suggesting an alternative route when one is not so available. So let's try this out a little bit. I think of myself, I think of Feldenkrais teachers as movement detectives. So I invite you to do a little movement process with me, and throughout we'll do some movement, and we'll kind of illustrate some of the principles of the Feldenkrais method. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I'd love it. It'd be good.
Okay. Good. All right. So Cynthia, you're going to do the movement. So folks will have a chance to not only participate, but also if they need a reference point, they'll have it. So I invite you, first of all, sit and have your feet flat on the floor. Notice, can you have your knees a little bit apart so that they're maybe about shoulder width or hip width apart. So you have a good base of support. And this is important in Parkinson's disease, where we tend to kind of, get inward a little bit on ourselves. And could you begin by simply lifting one of your arms up in the air toward the ceiling? Just go as far as is comfortable, what's easy for you, and come back down again. So do that a couple of times. And I would be watching or looking for things like, is your shoulder blade moving? Do your ribs, do your spine adjust at all, their position? Are they involved in movement at all as the hand is coming up? Do you shift your weight as you're sitting there? Okay, pause, rest for a moment. Our classes are called Awareness Through Movement. In order to improve movement, in order to learn new movements, we have to pay attention. See, this is getting back to some of that conscious piece. So we ask our students questions about the sensations that they experience in doing particular movements. So let's try it again. Lift your arm up in the air toward the ceiling and go slowly, Bring it down. You're going to do this a few times. And notice, where does it get maybe a little more difficult, a little sticky? Maybe you're tempted to tell yourself, oh, I should work a little harder here. I should push a little. Don't do that. Not necessary. The next time you raise your arm up, notice, do you inhale as you raise your arm? Do you exhale? I'm not talking about a right and a wrong way. Simply notice what you do. Maybe you hold your breath, and that's probably the least good option. So the next time you bring your arm down, let it just stay there and rest for a moment. Now, in our lessons, we ask people to step outside their usual movement pattern, to engage in something that might be a little different, to do the movement differently. Now, this is key, I think, for people with Parkinson's. When we move with conscious attention, we use a different part of our brain, and that part may be less affected by Parkinson's disease. Let me tell you about my friend John Pepper. I already mentioned this book by Dr. Norman Doidge, The Brain's Way of Healing. And you may be familiar with John because there's a whole chapter about John Pepper and his approach of what he calls conscious walking, really paying attention to all the components of walking. And he walks quickly. Well, another thing about John is that he, like some people with Parkinson's disease, has a tremor. And when John just reaches straight forward for the glass, just like we all do, we reach for the glass right out here, we bring it to our mouth, he's likely to lose a little of the beverage on the way. So here's the glass. What John has developed that works for him, and of course each person has to kind of discover this for themselves, he comes around, takes his hand behind the glass, holds it in a very unusual, unfamiliar, conscious way. And that enables him to drink without losing the water. So that's an example of using your conscious brain to work around some of those movements that aren't so accessible. In our going slow and paying attention, we want to notice small differences. So let's try something again. As you lift your hand this time, look at your hand going up toward the ceiling. Just watch your hand, notice your eyes can follow that movement along and follow it along, coming back down again. And notice that may change a little bit the way you move. Maybe you notice that a little more of your spine or your shoulder might be involved. And then pause, let your hand rest. Here's the other exciting thing. When we move slowly and with attention, we are supporting the brain's way of changing and learning. Michael Merzenich, the noted neuroscientist, actually, he's the one that did a lot of the earliest research on neuroplasticity, the ability of our brain, even throughout our life, to change and to grow. Michael Merzenich says, Dr. Merzenich says that these kinds of improvements and changes, learning, happens most easily and lasts longer when we pay attention while learning. And our work is all about learning. Now, this is also a little challenging, I think, for people with Parkinson's because perception gets affected. So we're going to use the hand that has not been going up in the air as a bit of a feedback. Take that free hand and bring it over to your ribs on the side underneath the arm that's been lifting up. Just rest it there. And I ask you to just listen, feel with that hand. Remember, we're paying attention to sensation. So this time, as you bring your arm up in the air toward the ceiling, notice, what do you feel with that second hand? Do your ribs move a little bit? You know, ribs are a little like fingers. They can go further apart and get closer together. So notice first whether your ribs do any kind of movement. And now, this time, help with that second hand. Encourage a little bit of supporting, a little bit of lifting, a little bit of opening of your ribs with that hand. Yeah, and you might find that you begin to do a little turning or you begin to shift your weight. Notice if your ribs can help you take your hand up as well as bring your arm back down. It works both ways. And then the next time you lift your hand, now we're going to use that hand on the ribs to basically hold your ribs steady. Don't let there be any movement there. And just begin very slow, just a little, don't force it. Notice, ooh, now that kind of limits it, doesn't it? And for some folks, that may feel like a really familiar movement. And that may indicate that, that's a part of this movement sequence that isn't so clear for you. And so that would be something we could explore a little bit further. Since our sensory and our motor systems are linked in the brain. So when we're paying attention, as we were there, to the sensation of a movement that's linked to a movement that we're doing, it's like we complete the feedback loop. When we pay attention and move slowly, brain chemicals are available in that connection between the neurons that are not there if we're going quickly and not particularly paying attention. These neurotransmitters, in addition to dopamine, strengthen those connections. They facilitate that communication. And in a sense, we're developing a new route. The more we use with attention that movement, the more established that movement option becomes. So what was maybe starting as a footpath, to use the map idea again, can become a sidewalk, can become a street, can become a highway, and can become available for you in the future. So one more thing, or maybe two. Could you just look at your hand as you, just bring your hand up in front of your face there, look at your hand, and as you bring your hand up in the air this time, let your whole arm rotate so that your palm begins to face outward to the side as your arm gets to its higher point. So if you're using your right arm, your palm is facing to the right, and then let it turn and come back, and you're looking at it again. Now, notice here, this may feel to you like a very different experience. Maybe now that you've got that rotation in there, there's a little more action that you can discern in your collarbone, or your collarbone in front, and your shoulder blade sliding over your ribs behind. You might be shifting your weight more clearly. Pause a moment. Pause a moment. Now, notice here that I'm not ever saying to you, do it this way. Go as far as you can. Push. This is not the no pain, no gain school of human improvement, as we like to say in the Feldenkrais method. Small, slow attention, and not doing it right necessarily, because we've got to reach in all sorts of directions in our life. So this last time, reach your arm up and go a couple times in one direction, and then maybe a couple times in another direction. So perhaps one time, bring it down, pause a moment, and start again. You're noticing, what's it like when you go maybe across yourself to the other side, a little more out to the side or more to the front. These are all part of that larger movement sequence of reaching. And each time we do it, paying attention, we are enriching the connections in our brain. So that gives you a little bit of a sense.
That's lovely. My right arm always could use a little extra re-education, so.
Good. I probably should have you just do it one more time just for yourself to feel what it's like.
It's got a little more glide and slide to the whole thing. It doesn't quite
Nice.
So sticky.
Good.
That's lovely. It's lovely. And I love the analogy of going from, a footpath to a sidewalk to a street to a highway. It is so important that we have some things that I want to say it differently. When we get stuck on something, we can really obsess about the thing we get stuck on. That's true of everybody, right? So people might be watching this that don't have Parkinson's. That's true of all of us. It's like we get obsessed with the thing we can't do, as if our salvation lies in the thing we can't do. Sometimes the salvation lies in going somewhere else, doing something.
Yeah, and that reminds me that a couple of weeks ago, I got an email from one of my students she has Parkinson's, but she's also in my Awareness Through Movement class. So here's the email. I got it this morning at 6:30 a.m. I needed to turn over, which by the way can be difficult for folks living with Parkinson's when they're in bed. I needed to turn over and get up out of bed. And I realized I was tucking my elbow right close to my ribs. It was exactly the movement we were doing in class. And that's one of the things I think is so exciting about the Feldenkrais method. You don't just go do it in class. You learn a process so that you are, in effect, your own movement detective. You can get better and solve your own problems. Something doesn't work? What could I do here? What other ways could I approach this? That's another wonderful benefit, I think.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is it teaches you how to be curious and to experiment and find a lot of different pathways. Something that comes up very frequently, and I did a talk to a Parkinson's group probably, I don't know, maybe it's been 8 years ago now, and they asked me what to do when they're walking and they freeze. And I wonder what you might say to that.
Well, let me step back one step here. You alluded at the beginning that in addition to being a Feldenkrais practitioner, I'm also a certified teacher in one of the Parkinson's specific exercise programs. And in my case, that's Parkinson's Wellness Recovery Moves. There are a couple of ways that I think can be useful in getting out of a freeze. And both the PD specific exercises as well as the Feldenkrais lessons can help with this. And so one of the things is, first of all, notice where you are and feel your weight and begin to shift your weight. So for example, I'm going to step back a little bit here so that maybe you can see me a little bit. If I'm frozen here, and I want to take a step forward and walk, but I can't do it. I can't do it. So the first thing that I might try to begin to do is just shift my weight. Maybe I can't shift my weight on my feet. Maybe though, I could begin to move my arms. Maybe then I could begin to shift my weight. You can't, if you can shift your weight, then a leg becomes free to take that step. Oftentimes, another technique that people find helpful is identifying something out there in front of where they want to go. So for example, I'm standing quite a ways from my computer. I want to walk over to that computer. I say to myself, how many steps will it take for me to get there? Doesn't really matter here, but it's going to take me 4 steps. So after I'm shifting my weight, I know that I've got a little bit of freedom here. Now I'm going to start walking and I'm going to start counting my steps. For a while, you may want to do that out loud. After a bit, maybe you don't, but you need to count. Okay, here I go. I'm shifting. Here I go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, it's a funny thing. There seems to be something about counting. It's so basic. We learned it so long ago. And for some folks, that counting of steps gets them going. Having that focus out there. So those are a few of the ways in which people might find some help in freezing.
That's very helpful. That gives me some different ideas that I actually wouldn't have used. And I think you were basically in the counting and in the movement. What I see also is that you're really getting into a rhythm, and rhythm seems to be very, very helpful. I've noticed that if I play rhythm games with my clients that have Parkinson's, or we sing songs together, or if I play some music sometimes and we do some things to music, that all the rhythmic things, even if it's just like this kind of thing, can really be helpful.
Absolutely. In the Feldenkrais method, we don't play music in our classes, but I do use music always in the mindful movement with Parkinson's class, because again, that's just so helpful. And music engages so much of our brain, and so that's useful. Let me mention another thing that I think is helpful and perhaps not as recognized, and that is the importance for people with Parkinson's for them to do some high intensity, some cardiovascular. So here's what happens. When we engage in a higher effort kind of activity, our brain develops more, has more access to neurotropic factors. Again, these brain chemicals that John Pepper and others refer to as miracle grow for the brain. So the BDNF, the brain-derived neurotropic factor, actually with exercise, it helps us to use the dopamine that is available more efficiently. There's also evidence that this kind of higher intensity exercise actually maintains and protects the ability that you do have. And there's some research, not yet in humans, but that it can also be helpful. It can be neurogenerative as well. So in the Parkinson's mindful movement with Parkinson's class, we do incorporate some small periods of time where it's higher intensity. People are moving around, even if it's just, in the chair kind of thing. For those, I have two classes, one chair-based and one actually standing, sitting, and getting to the floor, because that's such an important ability.
Very, very helpful. Do you, can you say a little bit more about what you think about in terms of motivation? I've noticed that it seems important that family members not take too much of a backseat role, is my impression, that if you're waiting for the person with Parkinson's to want to go to class or get out and do things, that's not always the best strategy. I mean, I'm not saying you should force people, but do you have some ideas about that?
I can't say enough in praise and support of the care partners. What I noticed, particularly with the folks in the chairs class, who admittedly are further along in their Parkinson's journey, their care partners are essential. They bring them to class. I try to suggest some ways in which they can continue to encourage particular movements if there's been something that we worked on in class. A lot of times at the end of class, I will ask people individually even, Cynthia, what are you going to work on this week? And I'm doing that within the hearing of the care partner. So they have that as well. I think having somebody to walk with, someone to exercise with, these are all important kinds of ways. So that you're right, that encouragement, we've got to recognize more and more that Parkinson's affects the family, the friends, the whole community around that person. And we want to support independence, yes, but it's also important to be there as a support and to go along with, or hey, come on, I'm going to go out for a little walk now. What do you say?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's helpful, because I think it is so. Really, I don't particularly like the term caregiver. So basically,
I like care partner.
Care partner is much nicer. I get very concerned for people who come to, when I speak at groups and people no longer introduce themselves as a spouse, but they introduce themselves as a caregiver. It concerns me, and I can understand how it happens, but I think it's important for all of us not to limit their relationships that way. So I like care partner quite a lot.
Well, and you can have more than one care partner.
Absolutely.
It may be a spouse, a child, other friends, and in a sense, the doctors, the neurologists are also part of that care team. People with Parkinson's are encouraged to have a team approach to their care.
Right. And so where the major care partner happens to be a spouse, I think it is really important that we are very supportive of them. But I think also it can be helpful for them to know that their partner who has Parkinson's is not necessarily lazy, or it's not really exactly that they don't want to participate, or it's more that they don't know get the habit
started. Right.
Not there to give the
right.
It's hard to understand how that works.
Yeah, and I think that feedback that I see that there's a better walk, or I see that the hand is going higher with greater ease, the person may not be feeling that. And so if I can model providing that feedback, and again, that's another role that I think care partners can play in terms of encouragement. Wow, you were really walking nicely today. That was just so enjoyable to take that walk together. Thank you.
That's sweet. Yeah. I think you've got another movement process to share with us.
Yes. I want to talk a little bit. I mentioned, this whole issue of falling. It's a huge, huge concern of people with Parkinson's. And I'd like to draw, you mentioned at the beginning that I am a teacher of Dr. Ruthie Alon's movement work called Bones for Life, which is really an application of the Feldenkrais method, those principles, specifically to posture, alignment, walking, balance, and fall prevention. I mean, that's like tailor-made for people with Parkinson's. I think it's one of the unique ways that we can help folks with living with Parkinson's to work on regaining balance when they start to lose it. So let's start sitting in a chair, and I'm going to move my stool here back a little bit so you can see. Let me move this down as well a little. So sitting in your chair, again, have your feet wide apart on the floor, your knees over your heels. I mean, you could even tap your heels a little bit, really feel where are those feet underneath you. Now you are sitting on your sitting bones, those rounded rocker bones at the base of your pelvis. And if you aren't quite sure where they are, you can wiggle around a little bit. You can even slide a hand underneath yourself and move around. You can feel that firm bone. So let's begin to do a little movement of just rolling a little backward and a little forward on our sitting bones. Now, when people first start this, what I notice is they tend to move, pause for a moment, they tend to move with their spine just like it's one stick. It doesn't have any individual movement between those 24 vertebrae. And so when you're going back, your head is going back. When you're going forward, your head is going forward. I like to use images. Most of us are of the age that we know what a telephone booth is like. And they are not big. In fact, telephone booths are teeny tiny places. If I were sitting in an imaginary phone booth right now, and I invite you to create an imaginary phone booth around you, the sides are only a couple of inches on either side of your shoulder, behind you, and in front of your knees. So could you find a way of rolling back and rolling forward on your sitting bones that doesn't end up with your head bumping either into the wall behind you or in front of you? And as you play with that, maybe the tip or the hint might be to let yourself get a little shorter. It's as if your back wants to round and the middle part of your back could touch the wall of your little phone booth. And then when you roll forward, there's a little bit of an incurve in your lower back, and you actually get a little taller. So we're bringing movement into the spine here and into the ribs. Pause for a moment. Another point I'd like to make, and perhaps this relates a little bit more to people with Parkinson's than not, and that is, please don't be discouraged. It takes a while sometimes for these movement changes to become evident. I've seen it so many times. We may go for a month or more doing this movement before a person will feel like, oh yeah, I get it. I can do this and allow my spine to curve. So keep up the practice. Now let's go another direction. Could you shift your weight a little bit onto one sitting bone and come back again? I don't care which one you pick. Go over to one sitting bone and notice, is your head going over there as well? Is your shoulder hitting the side of your phone booth? Is there a way you could move that your shoulder doesn't have to touch the side of your phone booth? You could shift your weight and try keeping your head a little centered. Let's maybe just tilt our head a little side to side. That's it. And notice even in tilting your head, maybe, possibly not, you might feel that your weight is also shifting. You might try interlacing your fingers, bringing them up through the center, up to the top of your head. If that's not so easy for you, you can just have your hands here on your chest. So Cynthia, you leave yours on your head, good. And I'll put mine here on my chest. And what we'll do is just begin to take one elbow up a little bit, one elbow down a little bit. So just alternate, one elbow goes up, the other one goes down. So your ribs are kind of like an accordion, getting a little further apart on one side, getting a little closer on the other. And what we could begin to play with is, as that elbow goes up, we shift our weight onto that sitting bone. Yes. When that elbow goes down, we shift our weight over to the other sitting bone with the up elbow. And then after a bit, you have that sense of how the ribs move, and you can just easily shift your weight. You might even begin to feel, notice we're paying attention to sensation. Notice that you're probably pushing a little bit with one foot to invite yourself to move a little over to the other side. So we can develop that ease. Now, this ability to what I call side bend is critical to all of us as we get older. And it's one of those things that I think we tend to lose. Now, if you want a little more challenge, you could use a towel and put it on one side of your chair so that only one of your sitting bones is on the chair and one is on the towel. And now what I have to do, I might have to kind of figure out another way. How do I lift that lower sitting bone? It's pretty easy maybe to lift the one that's already lifted, but the other one, not so easy. Another slightly more advanced practice, and again, do these things only if it's really safe. I often encourage students to do some of their movement practices in a hallway because the wall is there on either side. Some people find that visual feedback is useful, so in front of your bathroom mirror might be a good place. But if you're ready for the challenge, you could sit half on your chair and one sitting bone is off your chair. Have another chair or seat handy nearby or be near a wall so you have something to rest a hand on, and have, again, your feet wide enough apart so you've got the support. Now you could lower that sitting bone and lift it up. And it's probably getting clearer and clearer to you the parts of yourself, really a lot of yourself, that is involved in this movement. Good. Let's come back on your chair. And we're going to do the rest of this standing up. So let me just take a moment. Your weight now is on your sitting bones, on your chair. When you stand, your weight will be on your feet. So think about, where are your feet in relation to your sitting bones? And as I say in class, this is not a trick question. They're in front of, obviously. So let's think about getting up less as up and more as incorporating some forward movement, like an airplane taking off rather than a helicopter. And actually, sometimes it's less easy to get up if our feet are just parallel. So a lot of times I invite students in my class to bring one leg back, bring one foot back closer to the chair. And the hand on the same side, put it on the seat of your chair. So if your left foot is back, your left hand is on the seat of your chair. If your right foot back, it's your right hand. The opposite, the free hand now, is going to come to the opposite knee and begin to slide a little bit down the front or the slide or side of that knee. And feel you go forward and you're turning a little bit. We're going to use this movement again. But for now, when you go forward and down, push a little bit with your hand on the chair and bring yourself all the way up to standing. And you'll find that you're standing in what we call a step position, with one foot a little more forward of the other. And that can be also a stable way to stand, and then you want to get your feet wider apart. But let's go into standing, and I'm going to adjust my screen ever so slightly. Let's try that. There we go. Okay, so here I am, standing with my feet wide apart, and I'm going to go back to that weight shift idea. And I'm going to mirror. I'll say that I'm going to my right. So I'm mirroring, and as I shift my weight over to my right, notice what happens with my left foot. First of all, my heel starts to raise. Now, if I wanted to stay balanced, of course, I would use that side bending, but when we fall or start to fall, we're not side bending. Everything's over on this side, and our next stop is going to be the floor unless we do something. So let's learn what we have to do. As my weight and my head go over to this side, my left foot is beginning to come off the floor, and I need to get it back on the floor. So I'm going to really stomp that foot. So let's practice just that part. Just stamp your foot. Stamp that foot. Now, you may notice, as I do, that when I stamp my foot, a little more of me gets into it. I'm using my arms. I'm turning and bowing. There's a little of that spiral coming in again. And, in fact, my foot goes a little behind me and opens out slightly to the side. And this modified T stance is a very stable place to be. So let's try it from the top. Shifting your weight over to your right leg, and no, I will not fall. Try it again. Shift your weight over, you begin to lose your balance. No, I will not fall. It's important to practice on both sides. So let's go to the other side. You have the idea here. Shift your weight, you begin to feel yourself losing your balance, and no. And again, if we were in a class, we probably would practice some of the stamping first and work into it. But it's important to practice no, so that you have the ability to regain your balance when you begin to lose it. And it's a little more dynamic, so it's something you probably want to work up to, have an eye on your safety, have a chair nearby. Oh, I did forget to mention one other little note, and that is that I have a dowel rod here. We discovered in our class that some people living with Parkinson's find holding a dowel rod when we do balance practices is helpful, gives them a little bit of additional security. So that's just another little tip you might find helpful.
Thanks, Marg. This is a really chocked full of helpful information. I appreciate it a lot. I wonder if you could tell us, since this is the map is the territory, and about how maybe we could not be trapped in our own maps. We could say that would be at least one interpretation of that theme. How would you like to shift your own personal map or the map of your work or your field?
That's an interesting question. In a way, working so directly with people with Parkinson's has kind of shifted my map a little bit. Participating in the summit certainly has grown my map quite a bit. And a new endeavor for me is actually making available some CDs, of audio CDs, specifically for people with Parkinson's, and going further on this regaining balance. So we'll include some practices getting closer to the floor, some of what we did just here, as well as if you begin to lose your balance, falling forward or backward. So I'll have those available through my website. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking, but
I agree that you really stepped up here and expanded your map by doing this talk, which was outside your normal comfort zone, perhaps, and then also recordings. And in fact, Marg has recorded several lessons. I think there's 4 in total, 2 of which are specifically for people with Parkinson's, but actually anybody
could, yeah.
Anyone will benefit from them. And then the other 2 are maybe tended to have a more general audience around posture and et cetera. So if you happen to be somebody who upgrades into the all access pass for the summit, then if you do that while the summit is still going on, you will get $25 off the upgrade price, and you'll get access to Marg's bonus lessons along with over $500 worth of other lessons, PDFs, and things that are helpful to you. So just in case you were wondering whether you wanted to do that, and you've now seen and experienced some of the quality of Marg's teaching, that might be interesting for you to know.
And Cynthia, remember, we've got 1,000 Feldenkrais lessons that relate to voice and face and small motor. So these other lessons that are on the summit will be of value as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as we wrap up, let me just say that right after this talk is going to be our discussion panel on neurological challenges with Deborah Bose, Robert Black, and myself. Rob Black and myself. I don't know if he ever goes by Robert. I've always said Rob, but there I did it. I just spontaneously went to Robert. And we'll be talking about the 3 prior talks, so please feel free to tune in. When we do a panel discussion, we will actively monitor chat, and we will actually be talking, taking things out of the chat, putting them into the conversation with the 3 of us. And I think Marg maybe might tune in for the live panel.
Yeah, I'll tune in, yes.
He would actually be available if you had questions within the live chat and you wanted to direct them at Marg, although everybody will read them. It is a public chat. She can pop up and give some ideas or answers or things like that. So Marg does have coming up the ability to offer some services online on her website, and her website is, do I have it here? I seem to have lost it. Can you? Oh, it's Marg Bartosek, BARTOSEK.com. Did I do better that time?
Great, you got it.
Marg Bartosek, and you can find her there. And Arlene actually will pop that into the chat for you. However, for those of you who are thinking, I'm driving, I can't be recording this right now, anytime you want to get a hold of a speaker, you just go to feldenkrais.com, you click on the speaker's name, and you will be able to read their biographical information as well as ways to reach them and any kind of products that they have that you might find helpful. And then, of course, we'll start a new track tonight, so be ready for that. Okay, Marg, it was a pleasure. You did a wonderful job for us today, and I can really see your passion, the amount of work that you've put into making yourself available for people with Parkinson's and allowing yourself to be stretched and, actually really adapting the work and all of your knowledge and taking all your training and taking extra training and bringing it to them. So I appreciate that very much, and I know that your clients, your students appreciate it, and now some people online will be able to appreciate it. So
good. Well, I hope more folks will avail themselves of the Feldenkrais method.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have to say that when I have presented in Parkinson's groups, when I have clients with Parkinson's, it's some of my most enjoyable clients to work with, and I feel like I can make a really nice impact for them. So I agree. I hope more and more people check out the Feldenkrais work as an option for themselves in their own area. Thank you, Marg.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And okay, we're going to sign off here. You've got about 15 minutes. Get up, get something to drink, get something to eat. Come back and join us in 15 minutes for the live panel discussion. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.